Canadian Crew while driving podcast.
Little test run.
Start asking some questions, not necessarily giving the answers, but think about it. Maybe you guys think about it too, and so you can help us to figure out like potential answers for measuring volume in CrossFit. And so before we talk about volume, we're gonna make it clear that we agree that intensity is very important. And like we say in the CrossFit level 1, it's the independent variable most commonly associated with maximizing the rate of return on favorable adaptations. And if you haven't done the level 1, go do the level 1. And we agree with all of that because obviously that's what we do on weekends. But it doesn't mean that volume is not an important variable too. Volume doesn't trump intensity, but volume is definitely worth measuring because if we take a look at any established sport, it can be in strength sport, it can be like skill-based sport, like volume always plays like a very, very important role for the top performers. Like if we take Tiger Woods, skill-based sport, people, experts in golfing, I'm no expert, will say that because he started super early to deliberately practice for a very, very large amount of volume, then he had like a huge advantage when he arrived in his adult life. So we want to start to be able to like see how we can use the measurement of volume in CrossFit in order to be able to reconcile what the top guys are going to do at the Atlas, like Pete, for example, who's going to compete at the Atlas, and what our grandparents could benefit from in the gym if we understand how to measure their volume in order to achieve some fitness too.
And even just conceptually, like how does, not necessarily measuring it, but how does volume conceptually play a role at the beginner and the advanced level? And is there some sort of like continuum or theory there that can help you to understand better the continuity between how people train at the beginner and the advanced levels, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also the like, just back to what you said about some of the clues that tell us that volume is important. I mean, like, yeah, you can go to outside sports and that's going to give us some clues there, but also just in the level 1 manual, or, you know, one of the examples is, why do we do a 3-day on, 1-day off on CrossFit.com? And the explanation is because it maximizes both intensity and volume.
Yeah.
Right? So we talk about intensity and volume is mentioned at all these different points, even in the level 1 training guide, but conceptually it's hard for people to grasp like how that is sort of modulated and can be useful at different points in your training.
And I think it's because usually when we talk about volume, people always just think that we talk about adding volume.
Right.
I mean, the way we want to tackle this is that like potentially for some people, like in order to maximize their fitness, they would need to remove some of the volume. And that's why it'd be really, really good to be able to understand its role in the development. Like for beginners, I think it's a little bit easier to figure out that usually volume almost plays a more important role than intensity, because someone that just comes in the gym, we're not going to ask them to max out on a lift or to go completely all out on a workout. We're usually going to just gradually increase their tolerance through volume, basically.
By definition of implementing like our charter to intensity, we're actually keeping the intensity low at the beginning and just working a certain amount of volume to expose them to repetitions of the technical movements and expose them to the stimulus at low intensities before raising it up. So there's some,
Then if we think from inside out in order to like understand volume a little bit more, let's say we take a beginner. They come in the gym and they're going to start working out like 3 times a week. they don't go at 100% of our intensity, and all we start doing is just like gradually improving the amount of work they can do during the class. Because maybe at first they cut the rounds in half, and their goal is to slowly like only remove one round or only remove half the reps, and then keep increasing the number of reps, and then naturally, obviously intensity starts to be implemented. But then what would be like the natural like evolution would be like, hey, try to come like a fourth day. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe 2 days, 1 day off, 2 days. And to us, like, I mean, that just once again like shows like the role of volume. We naturally will tell the athlete like, okay, well, if you want more results, we should try to up from 3 days to 4 days.
Yep. I think you're increasing the volume.
And in the level 1, they talk about do this, 100 words, fitness in 100 words, do this 5 to 6 times a week. That could be the first volume goal, is to build a tolerance to be able to do this 5 to 6 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and that, like we said, at a certain point, it's a balance, right? You want to maximize both intensity and volume. So it's a push and a pull. Like you look at, you just look at the power equation. And does it say in the level 1 training guide, does it not say that work is volume? Did we not?
Oh, force time distance is the volume or the amount of work. Yeah, maybe at one point it does. We would have to double check that.
We got to double check that, because I thought I read that in there, but I'm not 100% sure. But if you think of volume in a classical measurement of like measuring 3 variables, like if you're thinking of measuring volume of like a curve or a cube, you do length times width times height. Well, then you can take that sort of idea and you can apply it to the power equation, and you can say the load times the reps times the sets. Those 3 variables gives you the volume. That's like the work completed or whatever, right? So that's kind of how I think about it. And so as we're talking about volume, obviously we it's important to define it. And like some people talk about it specifically as just the repetitions, but in many other places you're going to hear it talked about specifically like tonnage and powerlifting, which is what I just described, the load times the reps times the sets. Those three numbers are going to give you the volume, and it's obviously more difficult to calculate that with gymnastics movements and with monostructural movements, but it's not really important to have those exact calculations. But
it would still make sense though, because that would mean like a bigger athlete like you doing Murph is a bit more volume on your body than like someone who's 150 pounds. Even if you do the same workout.
Yeah, it's more work.
Because it's more work.
That's right.
So it'd be more gymnastic volume.
Yep.
100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, and 300 air squat.
Exactly. And it's like we say, the exact amount, the exact number doesn't really matter. It's just how you arrive at calculating its variability within the actual, work or task that you're completing. Just like intensity, or power output. The way that you calculate your intensity obviously is just like lowering your times or increasing your weights or your reps. Well, you can just calculate gymnastics movements by how many more reps you're doing of muscle ups and whatnot, right? You just need to know that you're doing more. But sorry, we got sidetracked there because I wanted to talk about the definition a little bit.
Well, one thing that I think that I personally struggle with when I try to measure volume when I program is that, for example, doing a 1,000 meter row, 30 wall balls, 5 rounds, is basically carrying in a 5K. Doesn't have the same impact on my athlete's body and myself than if we do carrying 150 wall balls all out, rest, and a 5K all out. Because there's that moment where like volume and, like you said, intensity, like they need to be balanced, but they also are linked together. Because if you do Fran every single day in 20 minutes,
right,
it cannot be calculated the same way as if you do Fran under like 4 minutes every day.
Right.
It's,
right. So you're saying that there's almost so the limiter on volume is basically the amount of work you're doing near threshold intensities.
Yeah. That's where intensity, like, I understand why, like, in CrossFit we're defensive when we say, like, let's add volume, because to most of people they think let's add like another workout.
Yes.
At high intensity. What we're trying to like measure here is potentially that could be a different discussion to know how many times you need to do an all-out 4-time workout type of thing. But we're more talking about like the skill work is like calculated in volume. And there, like, I think everyone would agree that if you add some skill work, if you add a 15-minute of snatch work 3 times a week, so you add some volume, you don't even need that much weight in order to like get huge gains in your fitness.
No, for sure. And so there's 2 things I want to talk about there. So the number one is yes, you're right. And if you look at big picture, sort of how like games athletes implement that, at times it can look like they're just going so intense all the time and they have all this crazy volume. But we have to remember that because they're so fit, their percentages, their lower percentages of work where they're just doing technique work with the snatch is like my 1 rep max. Right? So we look at them on videos and where they're just doing like technique work for practice, like their volume is high, but it's just skill work. They're working the neurological components of their fitness mainly. It starts to play with tricks on your mind a little bit, right? And then you think that this is what you need to do, is go into the gym and add all this weight to the bar to get fitter like them, when really you look at your relative percentages and what you need to do is hit your 1 intense workout per day or whatever you've determined is beneficial for you there, and then go in if you are wanting to do some extra work and keep it lower intensity technique, neurological response work, so that you're adding volume in a smart way so that you can actually recover. So that's the first point. But the other point that I wanted to just talk about too is that limiter that you're just speaking about of, you know, that yes, we're talking about adding that skill work in a smart way and understanding like how to do that. But then also on the same idea there is the fact that there is a limiter to how many intense workouts you can do in a certain time frame, whether that's like a day, a week, a month, and get benefits from the program, because you need to be able to recover, you know, as fast as you're working out so that you can continually get the benefits from the program, right? And that's going to vary person to person. And sometimes, yes, you will see and
throughout your age.
That's right, and throughout your age. And so sometimes and your training age, right? Your biological age and your training age. So you're going to see some people at times do, you know, maybe in a 4-day period, they're doing 8 really intense workouts. And however they've programmed them, that works for them. But it's simply because they're able to recover from that, whether that's because they're young enough to recover, they're fit enough to recover, they sleep enough to recover, they eat enough to, whatever it is.
We can even argue,
or they've been programmed well.
And maybe also they add enough volume to be able to recover. Right, like in the powerlifting world, like they'll add like a 1-mile sled pull when you're really sore, for example. Right. So that's volume.
Yes.
But for recuperation.
That's right. And I was actually talking the other day. Vellner came over to work out this week. He's prepping for Atlas Games, and we were talking about volume a little bit. And I was like, you know, my volume has severely gone down since last year. And I was telling him, I'm like, I still feel super fit. Like, lo and behold, one workout a day, I'm still fitter than I was last year, right? But competition is coming up, and I'm increasing the volume a little bit to prep for that competition. And why is that? It's exactly what you said. It's because I want to prepare my body for the ability to recover.
Yeah. While moving.
That's right. I want to be able to recover, not just within the workout, but between workouts. My body needs to be able to recuperate and respond to the stimulus, and then be able to repeat that over the course of a weekend and perform at those higher intensities. And if you never expose yourself to that volume, you're just not going to be prepared for it. So, there's an element in the sport of CrossFit, a specific, you could call it, type of training, where it's less specific in the classical sports science sense of I'm training for a specific skill within that sport, but it's more in a broad macro sense of, in CrossFit, your body needs to be able to withstand the work.
Yeah,
right.
And that's also how you drive adaptation, right? Because at one point, like let's be honest, for these top athletes, and like we can take you as a top athlete too, like at one point a workout like Fran 21-15-9 of thrusters at 95 pound and pull-ups won't get you fitter, because at one point you reach the max speed you can go at.
Yeah, so for me, like, that's nearly the case.
Yeah,
the thruster bar needs to be under the pull-up bar, and to minimize transition time.
So how do we improve Pete with Fran? We'll make you do it at a slightly higher load,
do
more reps.
Do friendly Fran.
Friendly Fran.
That's right.
And that's why, like in the sport of fitness, they do that.
Yeah.
Now, I think that we laid a couple of foundation and ideas for like reflection. I think there's another really important one. We talked about this already, like at different moments, but the games. Mm-hmm. Why do they work out 3 times a day? Why do we call the fittest on earth the person that like wins the CrossFit Games?
Yeah.
The CrossFit Games. Like it's called CrossFit.
Yes.
If we say that that everyone should only do 1 workout a day. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where like we have this idea that there's like some sort of, in some people's mind, like
there's a
disconnect between like if you're an athlete versus if you're an everyday life athlete, if you will.
Yeah.
And we believe that there's no disconnect. Like there's just some people that
there's just a continuum.
Yeah, that need that volume in order to achieve their goal of trying to be like the fittest, versus the other ones use the same principles at a lower volume because their goal is just to have functionality through life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's very important to put that in perspective. That being said, though, the biggest problem that usually we have as coaches is that people that see the games athletes they want to resemble to, and then they're like, okay, at this point in their life, they're doing like 6 hours of training a day.
Yes,
I'm going to do that.
And that's and I think that so that's a reason why it's important to have these conversations and to understand it, not just understand it better, to understand it in order to explain it better. Yeah. Because when you can teach people about how it fits into an explanation, accounting for every stage of fitness and ability along the way, then people have an easier time conceptualizing that and actually implementing it into their own training and being like a little more humble and smart about it. Versus when you think that there's a divide and you decide yourself in your head that you want to become a competitive athlete, then you're going to go from 0 to 100 because that's the only way in your head. Yeah. Right?
Because there's no way to, you got to jump the gap.
It's the only way to bridge the gap is just to commit. It's just to fucking go, right? And start just adding all kinds of crazy volume in your training. The only way that I'm going to get to be, compete at this local comp and be able to do 30 muscle ups in under 5 minutes is by adding all this volume. That's what you think in your head, but if we can explain the proper use of volume and people can understand that a little bit better, then they can be smarter with their training, so that they don't injure themselves, that they're, it's more of a, with their goals really, I mean, most people's goals is just to do this for their lifetime, right? So they can be competitive in their own respect for a longer period of time because they won't get burnt out, they won't get injured, all these things.
And so without necessarily understanding exactly where volume fits, if you're an everyday life athlete, the first volume you should add is like technique work.
That's right.
Like you should, and even if you want to jump from being like a regular 3 times a week like CrossFitter to like I want to start to do some local competitions, you don't need to necessarily add more workouts. You need to become much better at all the movements. So you need to add like a 1 hour or 2 hours a week where you practice double unders.
That's right.
Quality of movement in the snatch, quality of alignment of your spine when you're upside down.
That's right.
Quality of like, and yes, maybe with the help of your coach, you can target that you have a weaker upper body, and we can add like a little bit of extra work for your upper body. But for now, we're not talking necessarily that you should add like a workout.
Yes.
Like you should add like extra stuff. And you should also be careful, because the other mistake that we see of people that want to jump on that thing is that they remove themselves from class.
Right.
And
no, and I was just gonna say that when you frame your mind around what that technique work looks like in a well-run class, whether you're in the garage or whether you're in the class, like you can start to embrace that a little bit more and actually turn it into a little bit of a sweat session. Like technique work doesn't have to feel easy.
No.
Right? Like you start doing the Bergner warm-up, and
do it with an empty barbell.
You do it with an empty barbell, and even 65 pounds on the bar.
Yeah.
Right.
Make it maybe even an EMOM.
Yeah.
You do 3 reps of each in the first minute. The second minute you go do 10 burpees.
That's right.
Like make it, or 200 meter on a rower.
That's right. Yeah. And if technique work on the snatch is what you want to work on, then even don't be afraid to just EMOM that. Right? Yeah. With in some sort of complex where you're working positions, like you do a few high pulls into a few muscle snatches, into a few overhead squats, and I guarantee you 10-minute EMOM of that, you're going to be sweating buckets. No matter what weight you're doing, and you just work technique.
That would also be like a good conversation of how to like balance volume and intensity in a class. How do you maximize like the volume in your class without removing that neurological component that we just talked about?
It's good. That's value add in a class environment, especially for all those people who who say that the class isn't good enough for them because maybe they're not getting coaching, maybe they're not moving a lot. But it's a good tool for the coach to have in their back pocket. It's like, how can you keep the athletes moving but still work on technique and coaching at the same time? It's a refined skill, but that's definitely, we could do a whole other talk about that.
So guys, I hope you start to ask yourself the right questions. You can reach out to Pete or I very easily, either comment and we'll answer, or you can easily find us on Instagram. It's very easy, or come do the level 1 or the level 2 and we'll be happy to help you out with this. That's it.